Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. And thank you especially to the patrons who help make this possible every single day for you with their support at patreon.com/SW7x7. And today I also want to say thank you to the fine folks at Insight Editions who were kind enough to send me a review copy of Star Wars Return of the Jedi, a visual archive. Now, when I first heard this book was happening, and this was announced last year, I was kind of of two minds about it. On the one hand, I was like, well, that's great. Let's hope it's awesome. And on the other hand, I was kind of like, well, how is this going to be different, basically, from other things that we've gotten over the years? I'm thinking of things like Paul Duncan's The Star Wars Archives, for example, or J.W. Rinzler's The Making of book, or, I mean, you could even go all the way back to The Art of Return of the Jedi, the original. And by the time Return of the Jedi came out, they were really starting to capitalize on the books that they could publish about it. There was a book similar to the famed Alan Arnold Once Upon a Galaxy Journal of the Making of The Empire Strikes Back. They did one for Return of the Jedi. There was a book of concept art, lots of other stuff, and yet, seeing a book like the visual archive that Insight Editions released, it reminds me of a couple of things. Number one, that kind of every generation needs a book like this. The books that came out contemporaneously with Return of the Jedi are exceedingly hard to find right now. Books like Paul Duncan's Star Wars Archive are lavish, but they're also exceedingly expensive. Probably one of the best options prior to this for fans is getting a copy of Rinzler's Making of book, but doing the multimedia version that you can get on Kindles, or that you can use the Kindle app on your iPad, for example. But this visual archive actually makes the imagery accessible all over again, which is really, I think, the big point of the thing. And, you know, they call it a visual archive, and it is exactly that. And it is something that I think has been missing for quite a while. The book is filled with photos from the movie, photos behind the scenes and the making of the movie, photos of deleted scenes, photos that compare and talk about what the original version of Return of the Jedi was like versus the special edition. All of that stuff is fantastic. Additionally, they have all sorts of fun little features that are different from your average book. They have little booklet inserts. They have a place where they have Polaroid-like recreations of the various Rebel troopers' costumes on Endor that they were using for continuity. They have overlays of blueprints of like the Ewok village, for example, or Jabba's sail barge, and overlays of matte painting type things, so you can see the difference between what a shot looks like versus how they used matte paintings to enhance what a shot looked like. Gatefolds, right? Extra pages opening up. So yeah, that was very cool too. And the way it's written is also done in a very unique fashion. So it's kind of a combination of a visual dictionary and a reference like the Star Wars book, for example, along with something like an art of book. And it's also, and I think this is probably one of the most unique things about a book like this, is that it's a transmedia book as well. So it's making references to all sorts of other Star Wars storytelling, both canon and legends that have happened. For example, there's a reference to the Forces of Destiny YouTube short where we find out how Leia got the Bouche disguise that she wore into Jabba's palace. There's Return of the Jedi concept art from Ralph McQuarrie that turned out to get used as Palpatine's throne in The Rise of Skywalker. There's references to Andor in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, the Book of Boba Fett, and The Mandalorian. They even got the Bad Batch in there. Basically, the book taking concepts that were developed in Return of the Jedi and looking at how they affected other Star Wars storytelling. They even have panels that show from the original Marvel Star Wars comic run how Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc pit. And I'll share one other thing that I particularly enjoyed and also kind of gave me some serious nostalgic feels. In the old art of books from back in the day, they had a section at the end of those books where they showed theatrical posters and merchandise and other stuff like that. Well, they do that in this visual archive as well. So you get to see a bunch of different theatrical posters, including some from the 40th anniversary re-release. You get to see photos of old toys and swag and merchandise that they released back in the day. And they even have sections on the 2 Ewok TV movies that they put out, as well as the Ewoks cartoon series. That, of course, is all legend stuff, but they have nods to current canon stuff as well, flagging Shattered Empire, which was the 4-issue comic series that took place right after the events of Return of the Jedi, and then also The Princess and the Scoundrel, that novel by Beth Revis. There's even a thing in there about War of the Bounty Hunters, which is that comic crossover event about how Boba Fett actually got Han Solo to Jabba's palace and how fraught with trouble that whole situation was. We've talked about that on the podcast previously. If there's anything else that I would have wanted out of the book, I think, one of them would have been more overlays and inserts and booklets and that sort of thing. I really enjoyed them. I wanted more of them, but that's okay. And it would have been nice to be able to get this in the 40th anniversary year for Return of the Jedi, when interest was at its height about it. This does feel like it's coming a little bit late, but things happen sometimes, of course, and we've seen things in the publishing industry where titles are getting delayed, and a lot of that is out of everybody's control. But none of that detracts from the experience of Return of the Jedi, a visual archive. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and again, thank you so much to Inside Editions for sending me a copy to check out. I really appreciate that, and I highly recommend it. So that's what I've got for you on today's episode of the podcast. That is going to do it for the show. If you enjoyed this Daily Dose of Star Wars Joy, I hope you'll consider telling other folks that this exists. You can do that by just sharing this episode with other people you know or on social media. You can do that by telling the algorithms to show it to other people on their podcast apps and on YouTube, by liking, subscribing, joining, following, rating, reviewing, all that fun stuff. And you can even help support the creation and production of this Daily Dose of Star Wars Joy. And you can learn more about that at patreon.com/SW7X7. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode. As always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.